One more. I'm trying to be clean. 1, 2.
I've got to laugh for miles, 'cause I got hope and smiles. I am an idealist who believes in the world. I believe in choices. I believe in positives. I know we can reverse the crisis of
today. There were places that you could not go. And the Green Book, which is very true, the Green Book told you where you could stay or sleep, you know. Sometimes that Sault Ste. Marie story, I'm going to tell you, my father wanted to he raised 4 kids by himself after my mom died when I was 9, and I'm the oldest. And he wanted us to see Sault Ste. Marie. That's where the ships will come through the locks to go to the Atlantic Ocean. And it took 2 days because he would have to drive all day to get us there and then turn around and take us back because there was no place for us to stay. There was only one not a boarding house, but one place that would allow us, but they were filled up. They couldn't take anymore. And so he had no choice but to turn around. And he packed the car to the rim. We had lemonade, we had picnic basket, we had, you name it, we had all the things. Well, we looked at it as like camping. We didn't see it in a derogatory way. And he could stop for gas, but he could not go in, you know, and shop or anything like that. They didn't have stores like they do today in gas stations. So, but there wasn't any restaurants we could stop at, none of that. So we had sandwiches in the car. Well, it was coming back that I noticed something strange. It was my father. He seemed very anxious, and it was getting dark. And he knew he had to pull over because he was starting to nod off. And my job was to keep him awake. Of course, I didn't have anybody to keep me awake. But I noticed he seemed scared, and that was not like him. And he was biting his bottom lip, and he pulled over as far as he could, get into the side of the road near the trees and what have you. He had a restless sleep, and I realized now he was looking out for police to make sure that the police didn't come. And of course, they would have arrested him, and God knows what they'd done to us. And so, but we were okay, and took us back. That story that stayed with me because I had the fear, and I didn't know what I was afraid of. You know,
yes.
I'm sitting there, I'm scared, and I don't know why I'm scared. You know, and my sisters and brothers were asleep in the back. And he didn't talk, he didn't say anything, and we were quiet up front. And so that was a traumatic moment for me. Now, I want to say this, is that my introduction to trauma started when I was 3 in the hospital. And then, of course, sexual abuse from the age of 10 to 17. For 7 years. And so and again, I did not know I was traumatized. Didn't know. I had all the symptoms of trauma, but I did not know I was the terms. There weren't any terms. It was survival. That was what it was. It was about surviving it. And my sisters and my brother, we did just that. We survived it. But with a lot of ramifications. And that's what got me concerned about those kids at first place, because I knew what those ramifications would be for them. And it was important that those kids understood that there was compassion, that that they would be heard, that they could learn to adapt, and that self-efficacy, they can acquire that. and be able to move through their experience. They would not forget the trauma. And we let them know that they're not going to forget their experiences because they were so harsh. But what they have learned was how to conduct themselves, how to be leaders so that they could move through this world different than the world they came into.
Absolutely. In that sense, and just to tell the audience, we can't get rid of the feedback. We think it's on kind of a Skype issue. So just bear with us if you do hear this on the recording. But I did want to ask you, as you're sharing your experiences with the Detroit riot and what happened in Sault Ste. Marie with your father, I can imagine through my own experiences with trauma and violence and sexual assault, the feeling that you have as a young kid or a young adult, this feeling of fear. And you did mention that you had this fear, but you didn't understand where it came from until later in life. I would like you to talk a little more about it. How do leaders overcome that fear and be vulnerable, at the same time? It's so scary when we have post-traumatic stress, symptoms of post-traumatic stress, to have to get up in front of an organization, to have to be accountable to a group of people, and put yourself out there as somebody who has it all together and somebody who's strong with those feelings of fear. Tell us about that.
I had some feedback once from my staff, and they had said it was hard for them to sometimes understand where I was coming from. I was, talk to big macho stuff and what have you, but they were right. I didn't show my vulnerability. And so I had to learn to share with them what was going on emotionally for me. And that it, not that I was important to be a leader of the group or what have you, or perceived as a leader in the community, but I was a person that also had feelings and that I can show my compassion. It wasn't enough to be compassionate. I had to show and demonstrate my compassion, and which is a big piece. And like I said, that was something that I saw as a string between Eleanor Roosevelt and Dr. King and right. That was a string, and I realized I needed to do. And when I did that, it softened the relationship I had with my staff. It also softened the relationship I had in the community, because I can get into a meeting and I be piling just like those men, So I had to learn to be aware of myself. And at that time, I was going through trauma therapy, former trauma. People didn't know that, but I was going through therapy on and off for it, because it would rise up and interfere in my work life, my personal life.
Of course.
And they helped me to understand what was going on for me. So I had to learn how to deal with that, not only from a leadership perspective, but as a personal perspective, how to be with people. I wouldn't let people in the beginning hug me. I would freeze up when they would, try and hug me. Just little things. And it was all because, and I learned, of course, through my therapy, that was part of the trauma. That was the trauma that was preventing me from letting myself be vulnerable.
Right.
I was always on the vigilant. I was very aware of what was going on around me, and it was the way that I protected myself. I just didn't know where it would come from.
Right. That's what I struggle with too, is this sense of hypervigilance and anxiety around social issues with people, and you know, how trying to communicate whatever I'm communicating without all of that coming across, you know. It can get out, you know, and it's definitely a work that leaders must do forever. Like you were telling the kids, trauma is not something you forget. I would go further and say coping with trauma and finding ways to cope with it, especially as leaders, is an ever evolving, it's an ever revolving dance that, you know, and slowly we learn how to be more harmonious with our feelings and the things that we deal with every day in trying to help people and organizations succeed.
Right. Well, coping is adaptation.
Yeah.
That's what coping is. And being able to assimilate into your environment and recognize that there's some things that you have control over and there's some that you don't.
Right.
And you have to be able to move in either of those spheres.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, I really love this discussion, and it is unfortunately almost time for us to go. But I do want to ask you one more question for our audience. What advice and resources, aside from your wonderful work here of saving the leader within, what are some of the advice and resources you can give our audience members out there who are leaders and who work with people who have traumas or who just in general have traumas and are trying to find ways to adapt and to become resilient?
Well, one of the things that people have to be aware of if they are working with people who have trauma, that they have secondary trauma. They don't, it's not that they want to have secondary trauma, but when you're in it with that person for so long, or people for so long, you start to take on some of their behaviors.
Right.
Yeah. And that's secondary trauma. As far as resources, my recommendation would be groups, you know, participating in groups, because that's when you can hear the stories of other people and look at your own story through their stories. That helps because you're not alone. That's one of the things about having trauma. You think you are alone and that there's no one else that's going through what you're going through. Oh, you learn there are lots that are going through it. So there's all kinds of books that are out there now that talk about trauma. Before, you know, all this stuff was secrecy. People didn't talk about it because they considered it mental health issues. Well, yeah, there's still mental health issues, but they need to be talked about because it helps people through that. And the books, not the books I use for my research, that they're too technical. There are quite a few self-help books that are out there. I just don't know the names of them, but there are self-help books that can help direct people towards themselves, because that's what it starts. It's not outside, it's inside. And being able to look at yourself, that's the hardest thing to do, is to look at yourself and answer those questions of why am I acting or particularly doing what I'm doing. I'm a nail biter and have been since I was 10. And I became a nail biter from my first sexual assault, and I haven't stopped. I tried. I stopped for 3 years and then I went right back to it again. You know, so, and that's all part of that part of my life, you know. And like I said, I'm 70 years old, and I would think by now it would have been muted by now, but nope. It creeps its little ugly head up, you know, periodically. Something triggers it. Next thing I know, but now I recognize the triggers before I do. And with that helps to alleviate some of my negative behaviors, because they were bad before, but now I got a lot of those little demons under control. And so my best advice to people, it is to look for a group that you can feel comfortable with and be able to start talking about what's going on for you. And then if you can afford it, go into therapy, and because I had to convince my siblings to do the same thing, and it made a difference in their lives by doing that. And that's my best bet.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Cato. We are really, truly blessed to have you on this show. And I hope that everyone found what you said is to be inspiring as I've found. And really quick, where can we find your book, Dr. Cato, Saving the Leader Within?
Barnes and Nobles, you can order through them, and Amazon, you can also order through them too.